Hello everyone, welcome to my channel. It's an educational channel where we focus on great theories of everything, ancient and modern, mostly obscure, and try to do deep dives into them and help you figure out the best way to use them in your own life. For your paradigm shifting, your awakening to 5D consciousness, your formation of a holistic worldview, your quest for better spiritual, mental, and physical health. And today is our 79th video that we've done on Daniel Ingram in his book called Mastering the Core Teachings of the Buddha. And this is about the core teachings of the Buddha, not necessarily Buddhism, but some of the great nuggets of stuff from Buddhism without all the fluff and the ritual and the marketing and all the other things that ruin every religion. Probably most of them, other than the ones that are fraudulent, they have a kernel of truth to them. Whether that's a real thing or a limited hangout. And Ingram tries to delve into this, in particular, the techniques, technologies, science of meditation. Two kinds of meditation he discusses and the maps thereof. The maps of our various states or stages of consciousness as we go around the cycle of these different meditation techniques. The first is concentration on a specific object, whether that's your breath or a colored ball or a candle flame. And then also insight meditation, which is opening your five senses and also your mental sensations and opening to those and investigating them for the three characteristics of impermanence, dissatisfactoriness, and no self. And as we recognize that our sensations all have those characteristics, we kind of move around through the various stages of insight. And kind of every time we go through a cycle, we are enlightened or awakened by degrees. We are in chapter 38 of this book called Integration. So I take over here where we left off yesterday. When doing just about everything else, this way of proceeding may cause gigantic problems. For instance, when driving a car, we must assent to the appearance of our car as a discrete, functioning entity, one that should not collide with other cars on the road. We must notice the apparent solidity and functionality that we are in control of our car. We must pay attention to the interaction and boundaries of specific things and be attentive to the details of our driving environment, our destination, and the rules of the road. I do a lot of driving and find meditating when driving useful, but I meditate when driving completely differently than I would when doing insight practices. I pay close attention to the cars around me, the distances between us, the trajectories of all the cars, the signs and markings on the road, the speed of my vehicle, the road conditions, the feel of the car on the road, possible hazards, and the like. When driving, I emphasize mindfulness and momentary concentration, but not factors such as investigation, rapture, or other jhanic factors, as those could be very distracting. For real-world problems, I have found that real-world solutions are the best way to go. Right plane, right time. It must also be said that paying attention to our sensate world helps both with insight practices and daily life. Human relationships provide another example that contrasts with the paradigm useful when doing insight practices. Imagine someone saying to you, "You are so no self, so empty. You are so unsatisfactory. You are misery. You are so fleeting, so transient." It just doesn't work. Imagine going into a bank at which you have recently overdrawn your account and saying, "I do not exist as a separate entity. There is no I or mine that can be found." Thus, all this talk of me owing you bank fees is nonsense. We are interdependent luminosity. These just don't fly. Right plane, right time. Again, I would say that, instead of thinking of this as right plane, right time, and that these insight practices don't work in the real world, it's kind of a red flag to me. If you're trying to investigate reality and the real world isn't, cutting it. I mean, I'm not saying it's a deal breaker. I'm just saying it should be considered, at least. These are ridiculous examples, but if you hang out in spiritual circles and pay attention to the conceptual frameworks people use, and when and how they speak about them, you will find countless similar errors in judgment and the abandoning of common sense. These examples also illustrate how crucial it is to be careful when talking about our practice. Choose the correct words or degree of silence for the specific people around you for a specific situation, particularly soon after dramatic occurrences. I can't tell you how many times I have looked like a completely inconsiderate nutcase when I opened my big flapping pie hole to the wrong people soon after some intense insight or rapture had occurred. As the 19th century French occultist Eliphas Levi said, "Telling the truth to someone who can't understand it is tantamount to telling that person a lie." Wise words. Cultivate a network of deeply trusted friends with whom you can share your experiences, or keep a journal if this is not practical, or both. There is something helpful about being able to talk about unusual things in a safe and appropriate space, and something decidedly toxic for all involved about sharing with the wrong people. I am far towards the talk about practice end of the secrecy versus open disclosure spectrum, but practically speaking, we must be discerning about our audience and speech and not be idiots about taking this too far. It is not uncommon for people who get deeply into practice to encounter two issues. One, it is difficult to learn to go easily between one way of being to another, from one conceptual framework to another, and two, that practice and the world seem to be in direct conflict. Given our basic dualistic illusion, it often seems that we must let go in some literal sense, such as quitting a job, to let it go in the insight sense, to see the true nature of the sensations that make up the process. This is obviously not true, but it is easy to be tempted into resorting to such erroneous logic. One of the most interesting aspects of practice that arises when we have dissolved the illusion of there being some fixed center point, some stable agent, and some localized perceiver. When we have sustained this realization, is that the entire field of experience is now it. As the entire field of experience is now it, our consideration turns entirely to what might reasonably be termed relative considerations, except that now they are just considerations, as questions of ultimate and relative are resolved when everything just represents itself. Ethics, practicality, and aesthetics become everything. The details become everything. The big picture is not privileged over details, nor the other way around. There is no more sense that there is something holding back, that there is some conflict between realization and making this body, heart, mind, and world as good as they can be. Total engagement is now perfectly natural, even vital, as there is no other game in town, imagined or otherwise. In short, integration becomes everything. The implications of the world being everything are vast and transformative. Have you ever wondered at the staggering aesthetic beauty of many monasteries, tankas, rituals, gestures, mantras, and the accoutrements that adorn spiritual traditions that contain realized masters? The causes are many, but one is that for those with deep wisdom, there is nothing blocking that creativity anymore, nothing else to work on but truth and beauty, as the Bohemians put it, nothing else but the specifics to optimize. Attain to realization, optimize reality from that vantage point. You will be happy you did. As to the rest of integration, well, if we have insights to integrate, it just seems to happen naturally. That's about the best I can do. Life happens as before, and so it goes. We grow, we learn, we get sick, we age, and we die. Causality unfolds. To quote a song from the classic movie Casablanca, the fundamental things apply as time goes by. Go and read some extensive book on integration and tell me if it basically said the same thing while using a whole lot more words to do so. Still, such books can be helpful. I will shortly give some autobiographical information on my own journey, details of states, stages, paths, and meditative experiences. I basically stopped the narrative after the major insights in 2003, as while the stages are relatively easy to write about and map, the subsequent years of integration since then are not. That doesn't mean that those years of integration aren't important, as the gradual maturation that happens after insights is profound and transformative, but it is very hard to quantify. I continue to practice, study, go on retreats, learn, grow, and develop. But despite my fascination with mapping and pattern recognition, I see no easy way to impose any of those cognitive structures on that process since 2003. The key point here, once you have seen through the three illusions by your own clear practice, don't neglect the first two trainings, as they continue to provide a great foundation for the rest of the optimization that is the natural flowering of realization. Okay, that's the end of that chapter. Now we move to chapter 39, which is called It Is Possible. So why am I mentioning all these states and stages that are thought by many to be largely mythical and unattainable? Because they are absolutely otherwise. That's why people do attain these states today, though they tend only to talk about them with their teachers and close friends who have enough experience in this stuff to understand and not have odd reactions to these disclosures. I assure you that I wouldn't have bothered writing all of this if I didn't think that it was possible for those reading this book to master these trainings. As an example of a very different way of relating to attainments, Kenneth Folk was on a retreat in Burma and had attained second path as confirmed by Sayadaw U Pandita. He was finally done with his retreat and was taken to the airport by one of the lay people who helped run the monastery, who incidentally was known to be a stream enterer. As Kenneth was leaving, the layman yelled to him across the terminal, "Come back for number 3, meaning come back and attain third path." Note the many ways in which what underlies this statement differs from the paradigm you would likely find in a Western Buddhist context. First, most Western Buddhists don't really believe that after a few months of good practice you could awaken or awaken more. they do not believe it is simply a matter of following simple instructions, moving through the clearly defined insights, and tagging a path. In fact, I often tell this story to Western Buddhists, many of whom have been on numerous insight retreats led by teachers trained by the best Burmese masters. And they say things like, "What do you mean, third path?" It makes me want to explode in a great world-shaking blast of magical Vajra wisdom when they don't even know the basic structure of the path to awakening, much less anything practical about it. Most Western teachers wouldn't have the guts to stand up and say, "Yeah, he did it, he got second path," assuming they were even able to evaluate such a person's practice. If they could even identify the attainment, it would still be likely a huge taboo secret. The stream enterer who drove Kenneth to the airport also showed no jealousy on his part, but instead pure enthusiasm and encouragement for those above him to continue onward the precious and efficacious Dharma path. This is also radically different from the relationship many Westerners have with those who have successfully practiced the teachings of the Buddha. The driver had faith in his tradition, born of his own practice. In short, it has been done, it is being done, it will continue to be done, and there are good, wise people who would love to help you do it. Later, I'm going to go into details about a practice called mudita, or joyful appreciation, and it is the practice of rejoicing in the successes and good fortune of others. It is one of the 4 Brahma viharas, or divine abidings, and is a fundamental practice taught by the Buddha. The lack of mudita has ruined many spiritual practitioners and communities, since where there is no mudita, there is jealousy, comparison, toxic forms of competition, and disparagement or discrediting of those who attain the expected benefits of practice. Delight in the efficacy of the Dharma and in those who master it. Delight that beings awaken. Delight in the opportunity to have wise, accomplished companions on the spiritual path. Recognize jealousy and insecurity immediately when they arise and practice appreciation and the gratitude we should feel that we get to have wise Dharma companions. Practice, practice, practice. This is the big difference between those who are merely giving lip service to Buddha Dharma and those who really get what the old boy was talking about. Go on retreats with sane teachers and follow the instructions to the letter all day long. Find people who know how it is done and hang out with them. Keep it simple. Avoid magical thinking, except when doing magic with a K. More on that later. Don't lose your common sense. The simple fact that you have read this book means that the ball is now in your court. There is more than enough information presented here and in the other texts that I mentioned on straightforward techniques that have a great track record of delivering as advertised. As a wise chef in a gourmet restaurant where I used to cook said to me, "I have 2 words for you. Perseverance furthers." And that's the end of that chapter. On to chapter 40, which is called More on the Mushroom Factor. Which is good, because I can't quite remember what the mushroom factor is. One of the reasons that many people who make progress do not talk about it could be the fact that as practice deepens, the exaggerated importance to the meditator of thoughts of my attainment, I am enlightened, etc., falls away and assumes its proper proportion, its proper place in experience. However, this does not mean that such language cannot be used. While there may at times be good reasons to talk about attainments, and mostly good reasons not to. There is a long and glorious tradition of compassionate meditation masters and awakened beings who braved the consequences and told the world that it could be done, that they had awakened, and that they were going to tell all of those who hadn't how they too could wake up. The results of this varied from founding major religions to being executed or both. But such are the caprices of reality. It is interesting that the Buddha's teachings, at least as represented in the Pali Canon, started out very much as a tradition in which those who were highly attained were often loudly proclaimed to be so either by themselves or others, or both, with the specific details of their skills and understandings made clear. I myself need to overcome my own jealousy and practice mudita and delight for the days when the Buddha would say basically, Moggallana is a master of the jhanas and the powers. If you wish to learn those well, you should go study with him. Sariputta is an arhat and master of insight and analysis. If you wish to learn that well, go study with him. The motivation for this was that such individuals were valuable resources for others, and this should be known for the benefit of all. This widespread cultural phenomenon of meditation masters being out is abundantly clear in the ancient texts and occurs to varying degrees in Asian countries today. In the West, the situation is often markedly different from this early practice. There seem to be two basic styles of the code used when advertising Dharma teachers. The first is to simply use a grand title such as Wazu Tolku, Supreme and Luminous Dharma King. The second type of code is in the style of a resume for a job. Jane Rainbow is the author of 3 books. She has been teaching meditation internationally for 17 years and is a member of the Buddhist Blue Flower Society. Notice that neither of these bios tells you anything about, and he has a list of about 18 things here. Neither of these bios tells you anything about what they know, which traditions they draw from, what their education is, and whether they have been authorized by their teachers to teach, which is to say whether they are sufficiently awakened from the perspective of their teachers, their attitude towards scholarship and the standard theoretical frameworks, which techniques they have mastered and or teach, what they have attained or claim to have attained, what their personality is like, what their strengths and weaknesses are as a teacher and person, who trained them, the lineage or lineages by which they are claimed or trained, their level of availability to their students, why they teach, what they expect from their students, particularly regarding money, commitments, vows, exclusive loyalty or allegiance, how many students they already have, whether they will talk about real practice directly. If you run into trouble with them, whether there is a governing organization that can address issues or concerns. What is shocking is how few students will ever ask their teachers about any of these specific practical issues. True, we do need some background in both practice and theory even to know what to ask. Still, these are the questions that should be initially considered when seeking a teacher, and yet you almost never see them addressed on a retreat center brochure. Imagine a university in which none of the professors told you about their research, who funds their work, where they got their degree, who taught them, what courses they teach, what their specialty is, or even why they like being professors. That would be a bit strange, wouldn't it? This sort of information is typically available for public consumption on the university's webpage. There is something very balanced and reasonable about this. When I would see a presentation at the graduate schools I attended, someone would generally introduce the speaker and tell you exactly who the person was, what they were working on, highlights of what they had published, what positions and degrees they currently held, and why they were qualified to speak on the topic of the day. Perhaps I am particularly naive and idealistic, but I imagine a spiritual world where this likewise would be standard practice. I dream that this would simultaneously cut back on otherworldly spiritual ideals, provide faith that it can be done, demystify the process of awakening, and bring the whole thing back to earth, where we rather need it to be. There is a long way to go before such a dream is likely to be a reality, but hopefully this little book will be one small step toward that. There are cool things our minds can do and perceive, and there are definable techniques that lead to those cool things. Why does it have to be more convoluted than that? In my more cynical moments, I have sometimes thought that Western teacher bios could just as easily read, Jane is an Aquarian from California. Her favorite color is turquoise, and she is a mediocre chef. Or Wazu Toku is old and of substantial girth. His favorite movie is Animal House. These would give you about as much practical information as most teachers' bios do in the West. The assumption is that if teachers have been practicing for so many years, have a fancy name with multiple honorific titles, or if someone let them publish a book or teach internationally, they must be in some generic way a good teacher of something. There may also be the unspoken assumption that there is some unnamed but reliable body of teacher evaluators, not to say a panel of judges, a la American Idol, somewhere that have checked the person out. Either of these may or may not be true, and some traditions do a much better job than others of being clear and honest about such issues. Other reasons that more people don't talk about mastery or clearly advertise themselves are that they don't want to make others jealous or intimidated, as jealous and intimidated spiritual practitioners and teachers can be unpredictable, cunning, and dangerous mammals. Also, talking about the stages of insight practice can sound quite outrageous and bizarre. Further, with clarity comes mystery, and sometimes it can seem appropriate to talk about something that can often seem so slippery, subjective, and certain. The late great master Ajahn Chah once stated that even arahants could sometimes be unsure about whether they are arahants. Others, including one of my favorite teachers, have said that all arahants are always sure they are arahants. The second view is a bit extreme, buys into the diagnostic fallacy, and is a limited possible thought model. You know what I think of those. Thus, a major possibly valid reason for secrecy or codes seems to be self-preservation, though not in the sense of ego preservation. These are kind motives, but they also perpetuate the atmosphere of secrecy and confusion that pervades the modern meditative world. The unfortunate truth is that talking about attainments tends to cause far more unhelpful reactions than helpful ones, tending to isolate the attained person, to cause others to think of them as way too wonderful, too intimidating, or completely nuts, or all three, and generally to project all sorts of naive and unhelpful things onto them, such as a limited emotional range model, or worse, a limited possible action model. This can create situations that foster the abuse of sex, money, drugs, and power that seem to plague gurus and spiritual leaders with alarming frequency. Freud would have had a field day with this. As regards the bizarre and fantastic projections that are commonly associated with teachers, gurus, and other potentially awakened beings, such projections tend to arise because there is not enough widespread information on how misleading the limited emotional range models are and what preposterous junk the limited possible action models are, not to mention the lack of information on the absurdity of the wide range of other magical attributes that are imagined to arise from simply ceasing to identify with ordinary phenomena. I considered writing a whole chapter called Adult Children in Fantasyland, but hopefully the preceding sentence will do the trick. Okay, I think we're going to stop right there for today, and we'll take over again tomorrow at this same location, so please come back and check it out. Thanks for tuning in today, and have a great day.